Hello there, and welcome back to Bedtime Science. I'm really glad you are here tonight. A forest can look quiet from the outside. A line of trees, a dark edge beyond a road, a patch of green on a map. But the moment you begin to look closely, that quiet disappears into complexity. Leaves are measuring light. Roots are negotiating with fungi. Water is being pulled upward through trunks against gravity. Birds are dividing the morning into sound. Insects are cutting, pollinating, tunneling, hiding, and feeding. Fallen wood is being dismantled molecule by molecule. Soil is breathing. Seeds are waiting. And under the whole visible forest, there is another forest of roots, microbes, minerals, and chemical signals working in the dark. Tonight, we move slowly through that world. The ancient history of forests, the biology of trees, the hidden life of soil, the strange intelligence of plant systems, the sounds and smells of the canopy, the carbon cycle, the water cycle, the creatures that depend on forests, and the quiet ways forests shape the planet's atmosphere, climate, rivers, and human nervous system. Forests are not simply scenery. They are living systems old enough to have changed the air of Earth, complex enough to contain millions of species, and familiar enough that almost anyone can recognize the feeling of walking beneath trees and sensing that the world has become slightly slower, cooler, and deeper. Forests are the oldest complex terrestrial ecosystems on Earth. The first forests appeared approximately 380 million years ago, during the Devonian period, when the first truly tall woody plants evolved. Before this, land plants existed but were mostly small, herbaceous, and low-growing. The evolution of lignin, the structural polymer that gives wood its strength and rigidity, allowed plants to grow upward beyond the reach of competitors for light, initiating an evolutionary arms race in height that eventually produced forests resembling, in their broad structure if not their precise species composition, the forests that still exist today. These first forests were dominated by species now entirely extinct, including Archaeopteris, a tree-like plant with woody trunks and fern-like leaves that grew to heights of perhaps 8 to 10 meters and spread across large areas of what is now North America, Europe, and Northern Africa. The ancient Devonian forests transformed the chemistry of the atmosphere, absorbing carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen in quantities that helped shift the planet's atmospheric composition toward the oxygen-rich conditions that support most animal life. The carbon burial associated with those early Devonian and Carboniferous forests produced a geological consequence of enormous later significance: the coal deposits that underlie much of the industrialized world. When the first woody plants died, there were very few organisms capable of decomposing lignin, the tough structural polymer that made the wood. Lignin-decomposing white rot fungi did not evolve until tens of millions of years later. In the absence of effective decomposers, dead woody material accumulated in vast quantities rather than decomposing and returning its carbon to the atmosphere. This accumulated organic material, buried under sediment over millions of years and compressed by geological pressure, became the coal seams that human civilizations have been mining and burning since the Industrial Revolution. The energy released when coal is burned is, in this sense, solar energy captured by ancient forests 300 million years ago, stored in chemical form through an accident of decomposition ecology, and released in human timescales in a geological eye blink. The deep connection between forests and the chemistry of Earth's atmosphere is not a recent discovery, but a relationship that extends to the very origin of terrestrial forest ecosystems. The diversity of the world's forests is extraordinary and reflects the full range of Earth's climatic zones and geological histories. Tropical rainforests, found near the equator in South America, Central Africa, and Southeast Asia, are the most biodiverse terrestrial ecosystems on Earth. containing approximately half of all known land species despite covering only about 6% of the land surface. Temperate broadleaf and mixed forests, found across much of eastern North America, Europe, and East Asia, are characterized by their seasonal deciduousness, the annual dropping of leaves in autumn and their regrowth in spring, and support rich but less numerically extreme biodiversity. Boreal forests, also called the taiga, form a vast circumpolar belt across Russia, Canada, and Scandinavia and are dominated by cold-adapted conifers, spruce, fir, pine, and larch, in a relatively species-poor but spatially enormous ecosystem that represents the largest terrestrial biome on Earth. And beyond these major types, there are Mediterranean forests and shrublands, mangrove forests along tropical coasts, montane cloud forests on the slopes of tropical mountains perpetually bathed in mist, and the scattered remnants of temperate rainforests in places like coastal Chile, New Zealand, and the Pacific Northwest of North America. The boreal forest, or taiga, is the world's largest land biome by area, stretching in an almost unbroken band across the northern reaches of North America, Europe, and Asia. It covers approximately 17 million square kilometers, roughly 11% of the Earth's land surface, and is one of the most carbon-dense ecosystems on Earth per unit area, storing enormous quantities of carbon in both living biomass and, critically, in the deep, cold, partially frozen soils called permafrost that underlie much of the northern boreal zone. The species diversity of the boreal forest is relatively low compared to tropical forests. Many large stretches are dominated by only a handful of tree species, but the ecosystem complexity is considerable, with dense understories of shrubs, mosses, and lichens, and a fauna that includes moose, wolves, bears, lynx, wolverines, and billions of migratory birds that nest in the boreal during the brief, intense Arctic summer and winter across the world's temperate and tropical regions. The boreal forest is also one of the ecosystems most rapidly affected by climate change, with warming at northern latitudes proceeding faster than the global average and producing changes in forest composition, wildfire frequency, and permafrost stability that represent some of the more significant tipping point risks in the global climate system. The Amazon rainforest is the largest tropical rainforest on Earth, covering approximately 5.5 million square kilometers across Brazil, Peru, Colombia, and several other South American countries. It contains an estimated 10% of all species on Earth and is the source of approximately 20% of all freshwater flowing into the world's oceans. The Amazon is, in a very direct physical sense, a rain-making machine. Trees in the forest absorb water from the soil through their roots and release it through their leaves as water vapor in the process called transpiration, and this water vapor rises, condenses, and falls again as rain within the forest, cycling through the canopy multiple times before eventually reaching the ocean. Estimates suggest that between a third and half of the rainfall within the Amazon basin is water that has already cycled through the forest at least once, meaning that the forest is to a significant degree making its own rain. Deforestation disrupts this cycle, reducing rainfall in ways that extend well beyond the deforested area itself, with modeling studies suggesting that large-scale Amazon deforestation could shift the climate of the region from rainforest to savanna, a threshold that, once crossed, would be extremely difficult to reverse. Trees are among the most long-lived organisms on Earth. The oldest known living individual tree is Methuselah, a Great Basin bristlecone pine in the White Mountains of California, estimated at approximately 4,850 years old. It was already more than 2,000 years old when the Roman Empire was founded. Bristlecone pines live in one of the harshest and most resource-limited environments in North America, the rocky, exposed slopes of subalpine mountains at high elevation. and their extraordinary longevity is thought to reflect their extraordinarily slow metabolism. Their dense and resin-rich wood that resists decay and insect attack, and the dry, cold conditions of their habitat that limit the fungal and bacterial activity that would otherwise hasten decomposition. The rings in a bristlecone pine cross-section encode a direct record of climate variation over thousands of years. Wide rings indicating favorable growing years, narrow rings indicating stress, making these trees living archives of environmental history extending back before recorded civilization. The oldest clonal organism on Earth, and the largest organism by mass, may be Pando, a colony of quaking aspen trees in the Fish Lake National Forest in Utah, all of which are genetically identical clones connected by a single vast underground root system. Pando covers approximately 43 hectares and is estimated to contain approximately 47,000 individual tree trunks, each of which is not technically a separate organism, but rather a stem growing from the shared root system. The entire colony is estimated to weigh approximately 6 million kilograms, roughly the equivalent of 40 large passenger aircraft, and is estimated to be approximately 80,000 years old, though some researchers have suggested it could be considerably older. The individual trunks of a quaking aspen have relatively short lifespans of 100 to 150 years, but the root system from which they grow can persist almost indefinitely, regenerating new trunks after fire, disease, or other disturbance. Pando has been regenerating itself, quietly, in the mountains of Utah since before the last ice age reached its maximum extent. The canopy of a forest, the uppermost layer of leaves and branches, intercepts the majority of the sunlight that would otherwise reach the forest floor, creating a graded vertical light environment in which different organisms are adapted to different light levels. In a tropical rainforest, the emergent layer consists of the tallest trees whose crowns extend above the main canopy, exposed to full sunlight. Below this is the main canopy, a dense layer of interlocking crowns where most photosynthesis occurs and where the majority of arboreal animal species are found. The understory layer receives only a few % of the sunlight that falls on the canopy, and the plants adapted to this dim environment have evolved leaves with greater surface area, more chlorophyll, and different light harvesting structures than their canopy counterparts. And the forest floor receives less than 1% of the incident sunlight in a closed canopy tropical forest, barely enough for the specialized shade-tolerant species, primarily ferns, mosses, and a small number of flowering plants, that have adapted to function in near darkness. The forest floor is one of the most biologically active environments on the surface of the Earth. A single square meter of temperate forest floor can contain thousands of species of bacteria, hundreds of species of fungi, and hundreds of species of invertebrates, along with larger animals including earthworms, moles, and wood mice. The primary ecological function of the forest floor community is decomposition, the breaking down of fallen leaves, dead wood, and other organic material into simpler compounds that are returned to the soil and made available for plant roots to absorb. This decomposition process is carried out primarily by fungi and bacteria, assisted by the mechanical action of invertebrates that shred and mix organic material. And it is what closes the nutrient cycle, ensuring that the nutrients locked in organic material are continuously recycled rather than permanently removed from the ecosystem. Without decomposition, forests would rapidly exhaust their nutrient supply and bury themselves in their own unrotted litter. Dead wood, standing dead trees, fallen logs, and large branches plays an indispensable ecological role in forest ecosystems that was not fully appreciated by forestry science until relatively recently. A single large fallen log can support hundreds of species of insects, fungi, mosses, lichens, and other organisms over the decades it takes to decompose completely. Certain species of woodpeckers depend on old dead trees with soft wood for nesting cavities. Many species of beetles can only complete their life cycles in the specific conditions of wood at a particular stage of decomposition. Old-growth forests, in which trees are allowed to live and die without human intervention, typically contain 20 to 40% more standing and fallen dead wood per unit area than managed forests, and correspondingly support considerably more biodiversity. The recognition that dead wood is a living substrate rather than wasted resource has significantly influenced contemporary forest management practices. The mycorrhizal networks that connect the root systems of forest trees are one of the more extraordinary ecological discoveries of recent decades. Mycorrhizal fungi, the term means fungus root in Greek, form intimate symbiotic associations with the roots of approximately 90% of all land plant species, including most forest trees. The fungal hyphae, which are microscopic filaments that extend far beyond the reach of the plant's own roots into the surrounding soil, absorb water and mineral nutrients, particularly phosphorus and nitrogen, and transfer them to the plant. In return, the plant transfers carbon in the form of sugars to the fungus. This mutualistic exchange is not merely bilateral. A single tree can be connected through its fungal partners to dozens of other trees of the same or different species, creating a network through which carbon, water, and nutrients can flow between trees. The term Wood Wide Web, coined by journalist Merlin Sheldrake and made famous by forest ecologist Suzanne Simard's research, captures the network character of this underground system, though researchers are careful to note that the full range of what these networks do and whether terms like communication adequately describe the processes remain active areas of scientific debate. Suzanne Simard's research at the University of British Columbia, published in a landmark 1997 paper in Nature, demonstrated using radioactive carbon isotopes that carbon moves between trees through mycorrhizal networks under field conditions. Simard and colleagues showed that birch trees, which were shaded and carbon stressed by surrounding Douglas fir trees, received net carbon transfers from the Douglas firs through their shared mycorrhizal network, while Douglas firs received net transfers from birch in conditions where the fir was more stressed. This bidirectional, context-dependent flow of carbon suggested that the mycorrhizal network was functioning as more than a simple trader of fixed resources, but as a dynamic system that responded to the relative conditions of the connected trees. Subsequent research has shown that older, larger trees, sometimes called hub trees or mother trees by Simard, have more extensive mycorrhizal connections than younger trees and appear to be disproportionately important nodes in the forest network, a finding consistent with the network metaphor that has captured public imagination even if the precise mechanisms and degree of intentionality, if any, in these transfers remain scientifically contested. The chemical communication of trees is a well-established area of plant biology with robust experimental support going back several decades. When a tree is attacked by herbivorous insects, caterpillars, beetles, or leaf-feeding bugs, it responds by increasing the production of defensive chemicals including tannins, alkaloids, and terpenes in its leaves, making them less palatable and more toxic to the feeding insects. More remarkably, neighboring trees that have not been attacked often show similar increases in defensive chemistry, apparently in response to volatile organic compounds, airborne chemical signals, released by the damaged tree. This has been demonstrated in controlled experiments where trees are isolated from soil contact, but still show defensive responses to damaged neighbors, confirming that the signal travels through the air rather than exclusively through the soil. Whether this constitutes communication in any meaningful sense involving something like intention or awareness is philosophically debated, but the functional response, one tree releasing compounds that alter the chemistry of its neighbors in ways that reduce herbivore damage, is well established. The phenomenon called forest bathing, or Shinrin-yoku in Japanese, has been studied in a substantial body of Japanese and subsequently international research that has found measurable physiological and psychological effects from spending time walking or sitting in forest environments. Controlled studies comparing participants who walked for similar durations and distances in forest versus urban environments have found that the forest condition is associated with lower cortisol levels, lower heart rate, lower blood pressure, higher heart rate variability indicating greater parasympathetic tone, and lower reported anxiety and fatigue. The proposed mechanisms are multiple and likely interacting. Visual complexity of natural environments reduces attentional demand in a way that allows cognitive restoration. The sounds of forests, including wind, water, and birdsong, have direct calming effects on the autonomic nervous system and the phytoncides, volatile organic compounds produced by trees, including terpenes from conifers and many other tree species, appear to have direct physiological effects when inhaled, including stimulation of natural killer cell activity in the immune system, an effect documented in Japanese research on forest bathing by immunologist Ching Li and colleagues. Whether forest bathing represents a genuine medical intervention or primarily a pleasant form of exercise and nature exposure remains an active area of research and debate. But the physiological measurements distinguishing forest from urban walking conditions are generally robust. The sounds of a forest are a complex and ecologically meaningful acoustic landscape. The soundscape ecologist Bernie Krause has spent decades recording natural soundscapes and has documented what he calls the biophony, the collective sound produced by biological organisms in a healthy natural environment. In a healthy temperate forest, the biophony includes the songs of birds organized by frequency into non-overlapping acoustic niches, different species occupying different frequency ranges in what Krause describes as a kind of acoustic partition of the available sound space that evolved over millions of years. The geophony, the sounds produced by physical processes including wind in the canopy, running water, and rain, adds additional layers. Krause has used long-term acoustic monitoring to document the degradation of natural soundscapes over decades, finding that recordings made at the same sites decades apart often reveal the loss of species and the simplification of acoustic complexity that correlates with ecological degradation even in habitats that appear relatively undisturbed to visual observation. The silence that follows deforestation or other ecological disruption is not simply an absence of sound, but the loss of a biological community. The acoustic environment of a forest changes dramatically between day and night. The dawn chorus, the burst of birdsong that occurs in the hour or two around sunrise in temperate and tropical forests, is one of the most acoustically complex events in the natural world, with dozens of species singing simultaneously in a way that has been interpreted as territory establishment, mate attraction, and possibly as a signal of fitness to potential mates who assess the singer's ability to perform at low light and low temperature after a night of relative inactivity. The specific timing of when each species begins singing in the dawn chorus is remarkably consistent and species-specific, with the sequence of species joining the chorus following a predictable order that reflects both the light sensitivity of each species' visual system and the acoustic niche it occupies in the forest soundscape. After the dawn chorus subsides, the diurnal soundscape transitions through the day, and at dusk, nocturnal species begin to emerge: owls, nightjars, bats, replacing the daytime acoustic community with a new one adapted to the darkness. The growth of a tree follows a logic shaped by both its genetic programming and its physical environment in ways that result in the characteristic shapes associated with different species. The crown architecture of a tree, the branching pattern, the relative angles of branches to trunk, the density of foliage, maximizes the interception of sunlight by the leaves while minimizing the structural cost of supporting the canopy. Trees growing in full sunlight develop more compact, spreading crowns than trees growing in the shade of competitors, which tend toward taller, more columnar forms as they reach upward toward available light. The fractal geometry of tree branching, in which the pattern of major branches echoes the pattern of minor branches, which echoes the pattern of twigs, in a self-similar structure repeating across scales, is a mathematical consequence of the optimization of leaf surface exposure with minimum structural material investment, and produces the branching patterns that artists have observed and represented for thousands of years without knowing the underlying mathematical principle. The rings of a tree trunk are not merely a record of the tree's age. They are a detailed archive of the environmental conditions experienced during each year of the tree's life. Wide rings indicate years with favorable conditions, adequate moisture, sufficient warmth, low competition from neighboring trees, minimal insect attack. Narrow rings indicate years of stress, drought, cold, shading, disease. Rings that are compressed or distorted record specific events, fire scars, the partial girdling by a climbing vine, the pressure of a branch that died and fell against the trunk. Dendrochronology, the science of reading tree rings, has developed into a sophisticated historical archive that extends climate records back thousands of years in regions where very old trees or subfossil wood preserved in lakes and bogs has survived. The bristlecone pine chronology extends the continuous tree ring climate record back approximately 9,000 years, providing an invaluable resource for reconstructing climate variability over timescales that instrumental records cannot approach. Certain tree species have evolved bark that is highly resistant to fire, a trait particularly prevalent in forests where fire is a natural and frequent ecological process. The thick, corky bark of the ponderosa pine can insulate the living cambium beneath from the heat of a low-intensity ground fire, allowing mature trees to survive fires that kill most other vegetation. After such a fire, the surviving ponderosa pines shed their lower branches, which have often been scorched, and the forest floor opens into the park-like, open canopy structure characteristic of healthy ponderosa pine forests. The suppression of fire in such forests over the past century, through deliberate fire-fighting policies, has allowed dense undergrowth and ladder fuels, small trees and shrubs that allow ground fires to climb into the canopy, to accumulate to levels that produce much more severe, stand-replacing fires when ignition occurs. Restoration of fire regimes in fire-adapted forests through prescribed burning is now recognized as one of the most important and most urgent challenges in forest management. The relationship between forests and rainfall extends well beyond the Amazon basin discussion. Forests influence the regional water cycle through multiple mechanisms. They increase surface roughness, slowing wind, and allowing more precipitation from passing weather systems. They increase evapotranspiration, returning water to the atmosphere that falls as rain elsewhere. They intercept precipitation on leaf surfaces, from which some evaporates before reaching the ground, and some drips slowly to the forest floor. And they maintain soil structure and water infiltration capacity, reducing surface runoff and supporting groundwater recharge. Research on deforestation across many regions has consistently found reductions in regional rainfall following large-scale tree removal, sometimes exceeding what can be explained by local evapotranspiration changes alone, consistent with the hypothesis that forests influence rainfall patterns on regional scales through their effects on atmospheric circulation and moisture recycling. This connection between forest cover and rainfall is one of the more important reasons that forest conservation has implications well beyond the ecosystems themselves. The phenomenon of forest succession describes the ecological process by which a disturbed or newly available piece of land is gradually colonized and transformed through a series of distinct vegetation states. On bare rock or burned ground, the first colonizers are typically pioneer species, mosses, lichens, and small herbaceous plants that can survive and establish in hostile conditions with minimal soil, high light exposure, and fluctuating moisture. These pioneer species gradually modify the environment, accumulating organic matter, stabilizing soil, and shading the substrate in ways that create conditions suitable for the next community, typically shrubs and fast-growing light-demanding tree species. These early successional trees in turn shade and modify the environment in ways that favor the establishment of slower-growing, shade-tolerant species that would not have survived in the original open conditions. Over decades to centuries, the vegetation transitions through these successive communities toward a more complex and stable climax community, typically a species-rich, closed canopy forest in climates that can support forest growth. The nature and pace of succession depend on climate, soil, the available seed bank, and the specific characteristics of the disturbance, but the general trajectory from open, disturbed ground to closed forest is one of the most reliably observed ecological processes in terrestrial ecology. The relationship between forests and indigenous and traditional peoples represents one of the most important and most politically complex dimensions of forest ecology. Forests have provided food, medicine, building materials, cultural identity, and spiritual meaning to human communities for hundreds of thousands of years, and many of the world's most biodiverse and least degraded forest regions are those in which indigenous communities have maintained traditional relationships with and management practices within the forest over long periods. Research in conservation biology has increasingly found that forest areas under indigenous management or with recognized indigenous land tenure retain higher biodiversity and lower deforestation rates than formerly protected areas without resident communities in many parts of the world. The knowledge systems associated with long-term human residence in forest environments, ethnobotanical knowledge of medicinal plants, ecological knowledge of animal behavior and population dynamics, land management knowledge of burning and cultivation practices, represent a form of understanding of forest ecosystems that is complementary to scientific ecology and that has been accumulated over timescales that scientific research has only recently begun to approach. The smell of a forest after rain, that characteristic earthy, clean, complex fragrance, has a specific chemical basis that has been investigated in atmospheric chemistry and plant biology. The primary contributor is geosmin, a volatile compound produced by soil-dwelling bacteria called actinomycetes when soil is re-wetted after a dry period, and by certain cyanobacteria and fungi. Human olfactory sensitivity to geosmin is extraordinary. Most people can detect it at concentrations of 5 parts per trillion, roughly the equivalent of sensing a single drop of the compound dissolved in an Olympic swimming pool. This remarkable sensitivity is thought to reflect an evolved capacity to detect and locate water sources through smell during periods of drought, geosmin indicating the presence of wet, biologically active soil associated with water availability. The smell of rain on soil, called petrichor, a term combining the Greek words for stone and the fluid flowing through the veins of the gods, also involves the release of aromatic plant oils that have been trapped in soil and rock surfaces during dry periods, and the release of ozone produced by lightning during nearby storms. The forest after rain is an olfactory landscape as complex and ecologically meaningful as its visual or acoustic one. The carbon stored in the world's forests represents one of the most important components of the global carbon budget, and the management of forests is therefore one of the most significant variables in determining the trajectory of atmospheric carbon dioxide over the coming decades. Forests currently store approximately 360 to 600 billion tons of carbon in living biomass, deadwood and soil organic matter combined. Estimates vary considerably depending on methods and assumptions. Deforestation and forest degradation currently release approximately 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions each year, while intact forests absorb carbon from the atmosphere through photosynthesis and growth at a rate that partially offsets global emissions. The net carbon balance of forests, whether they are net sources or net sinks of carbon at any given time, depends on the balance between growth and decomposition, which is in turn affected by climate, disturbance, and management. Research has found that old-growth tropical forests, previously assumed to be carbon neutral because their growth and decomposition were thought to be balanced, are in fact significant ongoing carbon sinks, absorbing measurable net quantities of carbon per year. The phenology of deciduous forests, the seasonal timing of leaf emergence in spring, leaf color change in autumn, and leaf fall, has been one of the most closely monitored indicators of climate change in temperate regions. Research comparing historical phenology records, some extending back centuries in Japan and Europe, where cherry blossom and other spring flowering events were recorded for cultural reasons, with contemporary measurements has found systematic shifts in spring phenology toward earlier dates over the past several decades, consistent with warming temperatures advancing the cues that trigger leaf emergence and flowering. These phenological shifts have cascading ecological consequences. If the timing of leaf emergence advances, but the timing of peak insect emergence, which many migratory songbirds depend on for food during breeding, does not advance at the same rate, a phenological mismatch arises that can affect breeding success of tree-dependent insect-eating birds. The complex ecological timing relationships within forest ecosystems evolved over millions of years to synchronize interdependent species, represent a vulnerability to rapid climate change that researchers are only beginning to fully characterize. The light that reaches the forest floor is not simply reduced sunlight. It is spectrally altered sunlight, filtered by passage through the canopy in ways that change its composition in biologically significant ways. Leaves absorb red and blue wavelengths of light efficiently for photosynthesis, while reflecting and transmitting green wavelengths, which is why leaves appear green. The light beneath a forest canopy is therefore enriched in green wavelengths relative to the open sky. Plants growing in this understory light environment have evolved photoreceptors sensitive to the ratio of red to far red light, the phytochrome system, that allows them to detect whether they are growing in the open or under a canopy, and to respond by altering their growth form. In addition to the spectral shift, forest light has a distinctive dappled quality, produced by the movement of leaves and wind that causes sunflecks, brief, intense patches of direct sunlight, to move rapidly across the forest floor. These sunflecks are ecologically important to understory plants, providing brief pulses of high-intensity light that contribute disproportionately to the total photosynthesis of shade-tolerant species despite their transient nature. The soil of a mature forest is a record of the forest's history and a living system in its own right. Forest soils are typically stratified into distinct horizons. The O horizon at the surface consists of recognizable fresh leaf litter. Below this lies the A horizon, dark with decomposed organic matter and rich with microbial and invertebrate activity. The B horizon below this contains mineral soil enriched with materials leached from above. And the C horizon at the base consists of relatively unweathered parent material transitioning into bedrock. The depth and characteristics of each horizon reflect the forest type, the parent material, the climate, and the length of time the soil has been developing. Some forest soils have been developing continuously for thousands of years, accumulating deep organic horizons in cool, wet conditions. The deep peat soils of boreal forests represent organic matter accumulated over thousands of years and contains some of the largest carbon stocks in any terrestrial ecosystem per unit volume. Disturbing these soils through drainage, burning, or excavation releases their stored carbon rapidly in what is effectively a release of ancient carbon captured during centuries of forest growth. The tropical cloud forest is one of the more visually striking forest types and one of the less well-studied ecologically. Found on the slopes of tropical mountains at altitudes where persistent cloud or mist keeps the environment chronically damp, cloud forests are characterized by extraordinarily dense accumulations of epiphytes, organisms that grow on the surfaces of trees without parasitizing them. Mosses, ferns, orchids, bromeliads, and liverworts cover every available surface, trunks, branches, even the undersides of leaves, in a layered, dripping, green world saturated with moisture. The canopy of a cloud forest can intercept so much moisture from the passing clouds, in a process called fog drip or cloud stripping, that the forest creates its own precipitation, water dripping from leaf surfaces even on days with no actual rainfall. This moisture harvesting function is ecologically critical. Streams and rivers fed by cloud forest fog drip provide water to downstream communities that would otherwise have far less reliable water supplies during the dry season. The relationship between fire and certain forest types has shaped their ecology over millions of years in ways that make fire not a catastrophic disruption, but an essential ecological process. The jack pine of the boreal forest produces serotinous cones that remain sealed with resin on the tree for years, releasing their seeds only when exposed to the intense heat of a forest fire. In the absence of fire, these cones accumulate on the branches, their seeds unreleased. When fire sweeps through and kills the parent trees, the heat opens the cones and releases a massive pulse of seeds onto the mineral soil exposed by the fire, the ideal seedbed for jack pine establishment. The species has, in effect, synchronized its reproduction to fire. Similar serotiny is found in lodgepole pine, many Australian Banksia species, and various other plants in fire-prone environments. For these species, fire is not death, but the trigger for reproductive success and population renewal. The black ash that remains after a fire, visually suggesting destruction, often conceals a seed bank of remarkable density, ready to germinate in the open landscape. Ancient forests, old-growth forests that have never been significantly disturbed by human activity, are distinguished from younger forests not only by the age of their trees, but by a combination of structural and compositional features that develop only over centuries or millennia. These features include large, old living trees with deeply furrowed bark and complex crown structures, large standing dead trees in various stages of decay, large fallen logs at multiple stages of decomposition, multi-layered canopies with gaps created by fallen trees allowing light to reach the understory, and a species composition that reflects long ecological equilibrium rather than the simplified assemblage of recently disturbed or logged forests. Old-growth forests typically support higher biodiversity than younger forests of the same species, particularly for species that depend specifically on old or decaying wood, deep shade, or the stability and continuity of long, undisturbed soil communities. The area of truly old-growth forest remaining globally is a small fraction of what existed before widespread logging and conversion, and its protection is considered by conservation biologists to be among the highest conservation priorities on Earth. The forests of the Pacific Northwest of North America, the temperate rainforests of coastal Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia are among the most biomass-dense ecosystems on Earth, containing more carbon per unit area than any tropical rainforest. This extraordinary accumulation of biological material reflects the combination of high rainfall, mild temperatures, and a disturbance-mediated successional history that allows individual trees, primarily Sitka spruce, western red cedar, Douglas fir, and western hemlock, to grow to enormous sizes over centuries to millennia before eventually dying and entering the long process of decomposition that sustains the next generation. The largest individual Douglas firs in these forests can reach heights of nearly 100 meters and diameters of more than 3 meters, and individual trees can live for over 1,000 years. The fallen logs of these giant trees persist for centuries after death, functioning as nurse logs for the establishment of new seedlings, as substrate for the dozens of species that decompose wood, and as long-term carbon storage in the forest floor. The ancient temperate rainforests of the Pacific Northwest, the few remnants that escaped the logging of the late 19th and 20th centuries, are singular and largely irreplaceable ecosystems. The nitrogen cycle in forests is maintained through a complex web of microbial activity that converts nitrogen between its various chemical forms, atmospheric nitrogen gas, ammonium, nitrate, and organic nitrogen in biomass, and determines how much nitrogen is available for plant growth. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria, including species that live freely in soil and species that form symbiotic associations in the roots of certain tree species, including alder and locust, convert atmospheric nitrogen to ammonia, making it available for biological uptake. Decomposers convert organic nitrogen in dead tissue to ammonium through mineralization. Nitrifying bacteria convert ammonium to nitrate, which is mobile in soil water and available for plant uptake, but also susceptible to leaching. And denitrifying bacteria convert nitrate back to nitrogen gas under waterlogged conditions, completing the cycle. The balance among these processes determines the nitrogen status of a forest and has significant consequences for both productivity and the composition of the plant community. Forest streams, the small, often shaded watercourses that thread through forested landscapes, are intimately connected to the forests surrounding them in ways that make them distinct from streams flowing through deforested or open landscapes. The overhanging canopy shades the stream, keeping water temperatures low and buffering against temperature extremes. Fallen leaves and woody debris from the forest enter the stream in large quantities and provide the primary energy source for many stream invertebrates, which shred and process this terrestrial organic matter. Large woody debris, fallen trees and logs, creates complex channel structure, forming pools, riffles, and debris jams that increase habitat diversity for fish and invertebrates and provide cover for juvenile salmonids. Riparian trees, the trees growing along stream banks, stabilize banks against erosion, shade the water, and provide a continuous input of organic material. The connection between forest and stream is so intimate that the health of the stream is often a direct indicator of the health of the surrounding forest, and the deforestation of riparian zones is one of the most ecologically damaging forms of land use change for freshwater biodiversity. The sound of wind through different forest types has a distinctive quality that reflects the physical characteristics of the foliage and canopy structure. The sigh of wind through the needles of a coniferous forest, spruce, pine, or fir, has a different acoustic character from the more complex rustle of broadleaf trees in autumn, whose leaves vibrate and flutter in their own characteristic patterns. The canopy of a beech forest in full leaf produces an almost continuous low, complex sound in even moderate wind, each leaf a small sail, each producing a specific contribution to the collective murmur. Old-growth forests with complex multi-layered canopies and large, rough-barked trees produce acoustic environments distinctly different from young, even-age plantations, and these acoustic differences are now being used by ecologists as one dimension of biodiversity monitoring, recording the soundscape of a forest and analyzing its acoustic complexity as an indicator of its ecological complexity and health. in an approach called soundscape ecology that builds on Bernie Krause's foundational work. Fungi are among the most ecologically important organisms in forest ecosystems, and our understanding of forest ecology has been fundamentally transformed by the recognition of their central roles in processes ranging from decomposition to nutrient cycling to plant-plant interaction. Beyond the mycorrhizal networks already discussed, forests contain vast communities of saprotrophic fungi, species that obtain nutrients by decomposing dead organic material, and parasitic fungi that attack living trees. The large fruiting bodies that emerge from the forest floor in autumn, mushrooms and toadstools, are merely the reproductive structures of organisms whose main body consists of mycelium, the network of microscopic filaments that threads through soil, and wood in quantities that can exceed several kilometers of total filament length per gram of soil. The diversity of fungal species in forests is extraordinary and largely uncharacterized. Current estimates suggest there may be between 1 and 5 million fungal species on Earth, of which fewer than 150,000 have been described. Most undescribed fungal diversity is thought to be concentrated in soils and in the hyperdiverse ecosystems of tropical forests, where specific fungal species associated with specific tree species may await discovery. A tree is sometimes described as a simple organism because it does not move from place to place, but the simplicity disappears as soon as you examine what a tree must do to stay alive. It must solve the problem of height without muscles. It must raise water from soil to leaves, sometimes more than 100 meters above the ground, without a heart. It must build a body from air, water, sunlight, and minerals. It must defend itself without fleeing. It must sense light direction, gravity, temperature, water availability, pathogen attack, insect feeding, mechanical pressure, and seasonal timing. It must decide where to grow, when to drop leaves, when to flower, when to invest in seeds, and when to close the tiny pores on its leaves to prevent water loss. The tree appears still because its decisions are made in slow chemistry rather than rapid movement. But the stillness is not absence of activity. It is activity on another timescale. Photosynthesis is the quiet engine at the center of every forest. In the chloroplasts of leaves, photons from the sun are captured by pigments, especially chlorophyll, and used to split water molecules, releasing oxygen as a byproduct. The energy from light is then used to fix carbon dioxide from the air into sugars. Those sugars become fuel, structure, storage, defense compounds, flowers, fruits, roots, bark, and wood. In a very literal sense, a tree is built partly from the invisible gas carbon dioxide. The mass of the trunk does not come mainly from soil, as many people once assumed, but from air. A forest is therefore a vast atmospheric sculpture, a living structure built from sunlight and carbon drawn out of the sky. The leaf is one of the most elegant biological structures on Earth. It must expose as much surface as possible to light while keeping water loss within survivable limits. It must bring carbon dioxide in and allow oxygen out, but every opening that permits gas exchange also allows water vapor to escape. This problem is solved through stomata, microscopic pores on the surface of the leaf, each controlled by two guard cells that swell or shrink to open or close the pore. When conditions are favorable, the stomata open and the leaf breathes in carbon dioxide. When heat or drought becomes dangerous, the stomata close, preserving water but slowing photosynthesis. Every leaf is continuously balancing hunger for carbon against thirst for water. The upward movement of water through a tree is one of the more remarkable physical processes in biology. Water enters through roots and moves into the xylem, the specialized conducting tissue that carries water upward through the trunk. There is no pump in the tree equivalent to a heart. Instead, the movement is driven primarily by evaporation from the leaves. As water vapor leaves the leaf through stomata, it creates a pulling force that draws the continuous column of water upward through microscopic tubes in the xylem. This is called the cohesion tension mechanism. Water molecules stick to each other by hydrogen bonding, and the tension created at the leaf surface pulls the entire column upward. In a tall tree, the water column is under enormous negative pressure, and yet it holds together, molecule by molecule, from root to crown. Drought is dangerous to trees partly because it threatens this water column. When the soil becomes too dry, the tension required to pull water upward increases. If the tension becomes too great, air bubbles can form inside the xylem, breaking the continuity of the water column in a process called embolism. Once enough xylem vessels are blocked by air, water transport fails, leaves wilt, and branches die. Severe drought can therefore kill a tree not simply by thirst in the ordinary sense, but by hydraulic failure, the breakdown of the internal plumbing system that connects roots to leaves. Trees differ in their resistance to this failure. Some can close stomata early and conserve water. Others maintain photosynthesis longer but risk damage. The invisible struggle of a drought-stressed forest is a struggle inside the wood. Roots are not just anchors. They are sensory and foraging organs, exploring soil for water, oxygen, phosphorus, nitrogen, and trace minerals. Fine roots, often thinner than a thread, grow into small pores in the soil and are constantly produced and shed, much like leaves. The root system of a mature tree can extend far beyond the visible crown, and the total surface area of roots and their associated fungal partners can be enormous. In many forests, the living root tips are among the most metabolically active parts of the tree, negotiating with fungi, responding to moisture gradients, avoiding toxic soil patches, and proliferating in nutrient-rich microsites. The above-ground tree may look like the main organism, but below ground, another architecture spreads outward into darkness. The soil around roots, called the rhizosphere, is one of the most chemically intense environments in a forest. Roots release sugars, amino acids, organic acids, and other compounds into the soil, feeding bacteria and fungi that gather around them. This is not accidental leakage. It is part of the tree's strategy for shaping its microbial environment. By feeding certain microbes, roots encourage communities that help release nutrients from minerals, suppress pathogens, or improve access to water. In exchange, the microbes receive carbon fixed by the tree's leaves. The rhizosphere is therefore a marketplace, a battlefield, and a chemical conversation all at once. The forest is not simply rooted in soil. It is actively making the soil around its roots into a living extension of itself. The idea that trees communicate can be easily exaggerated, but the underlying science is still extraordinary without exaggeration. Trees do not speak, think, or plan in the human sense. They do not hold conversations in language, but they do exchange information through chemical signals, and their responses to those signals can alter survival. A tree attacked by insects may release volatile compounds that drift through the air and cause neighboring trees to increase their own defensive chemistry. Roots associated with fungal networks may influence the flow of nutrients and signaling molecules underground. Seedlings may grow differently depending on the chemical traces left by parent trees. The forest is not conscious in the way an animal is conscious, but it is not mute. It is a chemical information system, and much of it operates below the threshold of human perception. One of the most important truths about forests is that they are not made only of trees. Trees are the framework, but the living system includes fungi, bacteria, insects, birds, mammals, mosses, lichens, reptiles, amphibians, nematodes, protozoa, and countless organisms too small to see. A forest without insects would not function. A forest without fungi would drown in its own dead wood and starve for recycled nutrients. A forest without birds would lose many of its seed dispersers and insect predators. A forest without microbes would lose the chemistry that makes soil fertile. The tree is the most visible member of the community, but visibility is not the same as importance. Many of the most essential workers in a forest are hidden. Insects are sometimes treated as a background detail of forests, but they are among the primary forces shaping forest life. Caterpillars convert leaves into animal tissue, becoming food for birds during breeding season. Beetle larvae tunnel through dead wood and living bark, opening pathways for fungi and accelerating decomposition. Ants aerate soil, disperse seeds, prey on other insects, and in some tropical forests make up a huge fraction of the animal biomass. Bees, flies, butterflies, moths, beetles, and wasps pollinate forest flowers. Termites, especially in tropical forests, are major decomposers of wood and leaf litter. The forest insect world is so diverse that entire branches of ecology depend on simply trying to understand who is eating whom, who is pollinating what, and which species are still unnamed. The relationship between trees and insects is not merely one of attack and defense. It is a long evolutionary negotiation. Trees produce bitter compounds, resins, latex, tannins, alkaloids, and aromatic molecules to make their leaves and bark harder to eat. Insects evolve detoxification enzymes, specialized mouthparts, behavioral tricks, and life cycles timed to exploit the brief windows when leaves are young and tender. Some trees recruit bodyguards. Acacia trees, for example, can provide nectar and hollow thorns to ants, and the ants defend the tree against herbivores and competing plants. In other systems, caterpillars mimic the chemicals of ants or bird droppings to avoid predation. The forest is full of these small arms races, most of them silent, most of them older than human civilization by millions of years. Birds make the forest visible to the ear. In many forests, especially in spring and early summer, the first sign of the day is not light but sound. A single mature forest can contain dozens of bird species dividing the habitat vertically and acoustically. Some feed in the canopy, some on trunks, some in shrubs, some on the forest floor. Some sing high, thin notes that travel through leaves. Others use low phrases that carry through trunks and understory. Migratory birds connect forests across continents. A warbler nesting in a northern forest may spend winter in a tropical forest thousands of kilometers away. The survival of that small bird depends not on one forest, but on a chain of habitats spread across half a planet. Mammals shape forests in ways that are often easy to miss. Deer browsing can determine whether young trees survive to replace the old canopy. Elephants in African and Asian forests break branches, open paths, disperse large seeds, and create gaps that allow light to reach the understory. Bears carry salmon into forests in parts of the Pacific Northwest, leaving carcass remains whose marine-derived nitrogen enters trees, shrubs, and soil. Squirrels bury nuts and forget some of them, accidentally planting the next generation of oaks, beeches, and pines. Bats pollinate flowers, disperse fruit seeds, and consume night-flying insects. Even animals that seem only to pass through a forest are often moving nutrients, seeds, and ecological influence with them. Seed dispersal is one of the central dramas of forest life. A tree cannot walk, but its offspring must move. Some seeds travel by wind, shaped as wings, parachutes, or dust-fine particles that drift on air currents. Some float on water. Some cling to fur. Many are packaged inside fruit, turning animals into dispersal partners. A bird eats a berry, flies across the forest, and deposits the seed somewhere new, often with a small packet of fertilizer. A monkey swallows fruit in the canopy and drops seeds far from the parent tree. An agouti in the Amazon buries large seeds for later and forgets some of them, giving those seeds a chance to germinate. The fruit is not a gift in the sentimental sense. It is a contract between plant and animal, written in sugar. Some trees synchronize their reproduction in events called mast years, producing enormous quantities of seeds at irregular intervals. Oaks may produce very few acorns for several years, then suddenly release a massive crop across a whole region. Beeches and many conifers show similar patterns. One explanation is predator satiation. If seed-eating animals are adapted to ordinary seed supplies, an overwhelming seed year produces more food than they can consume, allowing many seeds to escape and germinate. The irregularity prevents animal populations from simply increasing in anticipation. Mast years ripple through ecosystems. Rodent populations may rise after heavy seed crops, which can affect predators, disease dynamics, and seedling survival in subsequent years. A forest's reproductive pulse can move through the food web like a slow ecological wave. The autumn color of deciduous forests is not simply the death of leaves. It is a carefully managed withdrawal. Before a leaf falls, the tree reabsorbs valuable nutrients from it, especially nitrogen and phosphorus, pulling them back into branches and roots for storage through winter. Chlorophyll breaks down first, revealing yellow and orange pigments called carotenoids that were already present in the leaf. Red and purple colors come from anthocyanins, pigments some trees actively produce in autumn. The precise function of anthocyanins is still debated, but they may protect leaves from light stress during nutrient withdrawal, act as antioxidants, or signal chemical defense to insects. The beauty of autumn is therefore not wasteful decoration. It is the visible surface of a biochemical salvage operation. Evergreen trees solve the seasonal problem differently. Instead of dropping all leaves each year, conifers and other evergreens build leaves that can last several years. Needles are narrow, waxy, tough, and adapted to resist water loss, cold, and physical damage. Their shape reduces the accumulation of snow and limits the surface area exposed to freezing winds. This strategy works well in cold or nutrient-poor environments where building new leaves every year would be too expensive. A pine needle is not primitive or simple. It is a durable photosynthetic tool built for endurance. In a winter forest, when deciduous trees stand bare, evergreens continue photosynthesizing whenever temperature and light permit, quietly taking advantage of conditions too harsh for more delicate leaves. The forest canopy is sometimes described as a separate world because it functions like one. In tropical forests, the canopy can contain entire communities that rarely touch the ground. Orchids, bromeliads, ants, frogs, snakes, birds, monkeys, and insects that live and die high above the soil. Some epiphytes collect rainwater in leaf cups, forming tiny suspended ponds where mosquito larvae, small crustaceans, and even frogs can develop. Soil can accumulate in branch forks, creating canopy gardens where roots grow in mats of decomposed leaves and dust. For much of scientific history, this upper forest was difficult to study because it was physically inaccessible. Only with canopy cranes, rope systems, towers, and drones did researchers begin to document how much life exists above ordinary human eye level. Lianas, woody vines that climb trees to reach the canopy, are especially important in tropical forests. They use trees as scaffolding, investing less energy in thick supportive trunks and more in leaves, stems, and reproduction. This gives them an advantage in disturbed forests and canopy gaps where light is suddenly available. Lianas can bind trees together, alter the way trees fall, suppress tree growth by competing for light and water, and create aerial pathways used by animals moving through the canopy. In some tropical forests, increasing liana abundance has raised concern because lianas store less carbon than trees and can reduce the carbon uptake of forests. The twisting vines that make a tropical forest look visually rich are also powerful competitors in the forest's carbon economy. Mangrove forests grow where few trees can survive, in saltwater, mud, heat, tidal flooding, and oxygen-poor sediment. Their roots are among the strangest and most specialized in the plant world. Some mangroves have prop roots that arch from the trunk into the mud, stabilizing the tree against waves and tides. Others produce pencil-like breathing roots called pneumatophores that rise above the mud and allow oxygen to reach submerged tissues. Mangroves exclude salt at their roots or excrete it through special glands on their leaves. They trap sediment, build shorelines, shelter juvenile fish, protect coasts from storm surge, and store large quantities of carbon in deep waterlogged soils. A mangrove forest looks tangled and harsh, but it is one of the planet's most effective coastal life support systems. Peat swamp forests are another form of forest where water changes everything. In waterlogged, oxygen-poor conditions, dead plant material decomposes extremely slowly, accumulating as peat over centuries or millennia. Tropical peat swamp forests in Southeast Asia can store enormous carbon reserves below ground, sometimes several meters deep. When they remain wet, the carbon stays locked away. When they are drained for agriculture or burned, the peat can oxidize or ignite, releasing ancient carbon rapidly into the atmosphere. Peat fires can smolder underground for weeks or months, difficult to extinguish and producing severe smoke. These forests may appear visually less dramatic than mountain cloud forests or giant redwood groves, but in the planetary carbon budget, they are among the most important forests on Earth. Dry forests are often overlooked because they lack the lush green image people associate with forests, but tropical and subtropical dry forests are among the most threatened forest types in the world. They grow in regions with strong wet and dry seasons, dropping leaves during drought to conserve water and then bursting into growth when rains return. Their trees often have thick bark, thorns, deep roots, small leaves, and water storage adaptations. Dry forests support distinctive species found nowhere else and have historically been heavily cleared because their soils are often more accessible for agriculture than wet tropical rainforest soils. A dry forest in the dry season may look lifeless, gray, and still, but many of its trees are only waiting, their metabolism slowed, their buds ready for the first reliable rain. Temperate rainforests are among the rarest major forest types. Unlike tropical rainforests, they occur in cool coastal regions where moist ocean air produces high rainfall and frequent fog, but temperatures remain mild enough for year-round growth. The temperate rainforests of the Pacific Northwest, southern Chile, Tasmania, and New Zealand are worlds of moss, fern, lichen, giant conifers, and deep shade. Their biomass can be astonishing because trees grow for centuries in cool, wet conditions that slow decomposition and allow wood to accumulate. In these forests, life is layered not only vertically but temporally. New seedlings grow from nurse logs that were once giants, roots wrap over decaying trunks, and a tree's death becomes an elevated path for the next generation. Redwood forests demonstrate the extreme end of tree height. Coast redwoods can exceed 100 meters, making them the tallest living trees on Earth. Their height is limited not by a desire to grow taller, of course, but by physics, the difficulty of pulling water upward, the risk of hydraulic failure, wind stress, and the diminishing returns of raising leaves ever higher. Redwoods survive in part because they live in foggy coastal environments. Fog condenses on needles and branches, dripping to the forest floor and reducing summer drought stress. Some water may be absorbed directly by leaves. These trees are therefore partly dependent on the sea air that moves inland from the Pacific. Their enormous trunks and quiet groves are connected to ocean fog. Giant sequoias are not the tallest trees, but they are the largest by volume. A mature giant sequoia can contain more wood than any other single-stem tree on Earth. Their bark can be more than half a meter thick, insulating them from fire, and their cones often release seeds after heat exposure. Fire clears the forest floor, opens the canopy, exposes mineral soil, and reduces competition, creating conditions for sequoia seedlings. For much of the 20th century, fire suppression changed these conditions, making seedling establishment more difficult and allowing fuel to accumulate. The modern understanding of sequoia ecology recognizes that the survival of these ancient trees depends not on protecting them from all fire, but on allowing the right kind of fire to return. Forest fire is often imagined only as destruction, but ecologically it can be renewal, sorting, clearing, and memory. Low-intensity fires remove leaf litter and understory growth without killing mature fire-adapted trees. Stand-replacing fires kill most trees in an area, but create openings for species that need sunlight and exposed soil. Some forests burn frequently and recover quickly. Others burn rarely and catastrophically. Problems arise when climate warming, drought, land use change, and fire suppression alter the frequency, intensity, or seasonality of fire beyond what the ecosystem evolved with. A fire-adapted forest can survive fire, but a forest adapted to cool, moist conditions may not recover if severe fire becomes too frequent. Fire is not one thing. It is a process whose meaning depends on context. After a fire, the forest begins again in ways that are both visible and hidden. Blackened trunks stand above ash. Light reaches the ground. Seeds released by heat germinate. Fireweed and other pioneer plants appear in open patches. Wood-boring beetles arrive, and woodpeckers follow them. Nutrients locked in vegetation return to soil and ash. Some surviving roots send up new shoots. Fungi fruit in abundance, including species that appear especially after fire. The burned forest is not an ecological blank space. It is a different stage of forest life, rich in resources for species adapted to that brief window. Humans often see the charred landscape and think only of loss. Ecology also sees opportunity, succession, and the beginning of a new pattern. Storms are another major force shaping forests. Wind throw, the uprooting or snapping of trees by wind, creates canopy gaps that allow light to reach the forest floor. These gaps are essential in many forests because they provide the light conditions required for seedlings and saplings to grow into the canopy. The death of one large tree can create a small sunlit room in the forest, changing temperature, humidity, plant growth, insect activity, and animal movement in that patch for years. Hurricanes, cyclones, ice storms, and heavy snow can rearrange whole forests at once. What looks like damage from a human perspective may be part of the forest's long-term rhythm of disturbance and regeneration. A forest gap is a small laboratory of competition. When light suddenly reaches the ground, seedlings that have waited for years in shade may accelerate upward. Fast-growing pioneer species may arrive from seed. Vines may climb. Shrubs may expand. The first plants to capture light can change the future of that patch for decades. Some saplings are already established in the understory before the gap appears, living in slow motion until the opportunity comes. Others germinate only after disturbance. The forest canopy, then, is not continuous permanence. It is a shifting mosaic of openings and closures, growth and death, with every patch of light carrying consequences. Shade tolerance is one of the key traits that determines forest succession. Some trees, such as many birches and poplars, need strong light and grow quickly in open areas, but cannot persist under a closed canopy. Others, such as beeches, hemlocks, and some maples, can survive for years in deep shade, growing slowly until a canopy gap gives them a chance to rise. This difference creates predictable patterns. After a disturbance, light-loving pioneers dominate. Over time, shade-tolerant species establish beneath them and eventually replace them. But the pattern is never perfectly simple because soil, herbivores, disease, fire, climate, and chance all intervene. A forest is predictable in broad tendencies and surprising in detail. Lichens are among the quietest and most resilient members of forest ecosystems. A lichen is not a single organism but a symbiosis, usually between a fungus and a photosynthetic partner, either an alga or a cyanobacterium. The fungus provides structure and protection. The photosynthetic partner provides sugars. Lichens can grow on bark, rock, soil, and dead wood, often in conditions too harsh for ordinary plants. Some fix nitrogen, adding nutrients to ecosystems. Others provide food for reindeer and caribou in northern forests. Because many lichens are sensitive to air pollution, their presence or absence can indicate atmospheric quality. They grow slowly, sometimes only millimeters per year, making them subtle markers of time, air, and surface stability. Mosses transform the microclimate of a forest. They hold water like sponges, soften the forest floor, cover rocks and logs, and create moist habitats for tiny invertebrates. In cloud forests and temperate rainforests, moss can blanket trunks and branches so completely that trees seem wrapped in green velvet. Mosses do not have true roots, drawing water across their surfaces, which makes them highly responsive to humidity. After rain, dry moss can swell and become vivid within minutes. During drought, it can shrink into a dormant state and wait. These small plants are ancient, older in evolutionary design than flowering plants, and their quiet persistence gives forests much of their texture. The forest edge is a different environment from the forest interior. At the edge, light is stronger, wind is greater, temperature fluctuates more, and humidity is lower. Species adapted to open or disturbed habitats often thrive there, while interior forest species may avoid it. When forests are fragmented by roads, farms, or urban development, the amount of edge increases dramatically, even if the total area of forest appears only moderately reduced. This creates edge effects, drying, invasive species entry, increased predation on nests, altered plant communities, and changes in animal movement. A small patch of forest is not simply a smaller version of a large forest. Its shape, edges, and isolation change the ecology within it. Forest fragmentation can also separate populations of animals and plants that once exchanged genes freely. A bird may be unwilling to cross open farmland. A salamander may be unable to survive the dry conditions between patches. A tree species may depend on an animal disperser that no longer moves through the landscape. Over time, isolated populations can lose genetic diversity, become more vulnerable to disease, or disappear from patches too small to support them. Conservation biology therefore focuses not only on protecting forest area, but on maintaining connectivity, corridors, stepping stone habitats, riparian strips, and landscape patterns that allow organisms to move. The life of a forest often depends on what lies beyond its visible boundary. Urban forests are younger and more fragmented than wild forests, but they are still ecologically and psychologically important. Street trees cool neighborhoods through shade and transpiration, reducing the urban heat island effect. They filter particulate pollution, slow stormwater runoff, provide habitat for birds and insects, and improve the appearance and livability of cities. Studies have found associations between urban tree cover and lower stress, improved mental well-being, and even reduced heat-related illness during extreme temperatures. An urban tree is not a replacement for an old-growth forest, but it is not trivial. For many people, the tree outside a window or along a sidewalk is the most regular contact with the living green systems of the planet. Forests influence climate in more than one direction. They store carbon, which tends to cool the climate by reducing atmospheric carbon dioxide. They release water vapor, which affects clouds and rainfall. They change the reflectivity of the land surface. A dark evergreen forest absorbs more sunlight than snow-covered open land, which can produce a warming effect in some high-latitude regions. Tropical forests, by contrast, strongly cool their regions through evapotranspiration and cloud formation. This means that forest-climate relationships are complex. Planting trees is not automatically beneficial everywhere in the same way. The species, location, soil, water, fire regime, and long-term survival of the forest all matter. A forest is not a simple carbon machine. It is part of a climate system with many feedbacks. The idea of planting trees to solve climate change is emotionally appealing but scientifically incomplete. Reforestation and forest protection are valuable, especially when they restore native ecosystems, protect biodiversity, and preserve carbon-rich soils. But a plantation of one fast-growing species is not equivalent to a mature, diverse forest. A newly planted tree stores little carbon at first compared to an old tree and the soil ecosystem around it. If planted trees die from drought, fire, disease, or poor management, their promised carbon storage never materializes. The most effective forest climate actions usually include protecting existing intact forests, restoring degraded forests with appropriate native species, and respecting the ecological and human communities already connected to those landscapes. Forest restoration is powerful, but only when treated as ecology, not as accounting. Remote sensing has transformed forest science. Satellites can measure forest cover, canopy height, leaf area, fire scars, seasonal greenness, and deforestation patterns across the entire planet. LiDAR, light detection and ranging, can send laser pulses from aircraft or satellites and measure the three-dimensional structure of the canopy, revealing tree height, canopy layers, biomass, and even traces of ancient human settlements hidden beneath tropical forest. In the Amazon, Central America, and Southeast Asia, LiDAR has revealed roads, terraces, plazas, and settlement patterns beneath dense canopy, showing that many forests once considered untouched wilderness were shaped by human societies for centuries or millennia. The forest hides not only biological complexity, but also human history. The idea of a pristine forest, untouched by humans, is more complicated than it first appears. Some forests have indeed experienced little direct human disturbance. But many landscapes that look wild today have been influenced by indigenous burning, planting, hunting, harvesting, and species management over long periods. In parts of the Amazon, concentrations of useful tree species near archaeological sites suggest long-term human influence on forest composition. In Australia, fire management by Aboriginal peoples shaped vegetation mosaics over thousands of years. In North America, cultural burning influenced oak savannas, pine forests, and berry-producing landscapes. Recognizing this does not diminish forests. It deepens them. Some forests are not untouched nature, but long relationships between people and ecosystems. Forest medicines have shaped human history. Many compounds used in medicine come directly or indirectly from forest plants, fungi, or associated organisms. Aspirin traces its history to salicylates found in willow bark. The anti-cancer drug paclitaxel was first derived from the Pacific yew. Quinine, historically crucial for treating malaria, comes from the bark of cinchona trees. Countless traditional medicines are derived from forest species whose chemistry evolved for defense, signaling, competition, or survival. The chemical diversity of forests is enormous because every plant and fungus participates in ecological relationships that reward molecular innovation. A forest is therefore not only a habitat, it is a vast chemical library, most of whose books have not yet been opened. The loss of a forest species can mean the loss of a chemistry no one has studied, a relationship no one has mapped, a role no one knew was important. Extinction in a forest is rarely a single clean event. It can cascade through mutualisms and dependencies. A fruiting tree disappears. The bird that depends on its fruit declines. The seeds of another plant are dispersed less often. The predator that fed on the bird shifts behavior. The forest composition changes over time. Some relationships are redundant, with multiple species able to perform similar roles. Others are highly specific. Conservation biology must therefore contend with a difficult truth. We often do not know which species are structurally essential until their absence begins to change the system. The night forest is not the daytime forest in darkness. It is a different community. Moths replace butterflies. Bats replace many-day flying insect predators. Owls hunt by sound. Rodents move through leaf litter. Frogs call from wet places. Many flowers release scent most strongly at night to attract nocturnal pollinators. Some tree-dwelling mammals move only after sunset, using darkness as cover. The temperature falls, humidity rises, and scent moves differently through the air. Human visitors often experience the night forest as mysterious or threatening because vision becomes less reliable. But to many organisms, night is the active half of forest life. The glow of bioluminescent fungi in some forests is one of the stranger visual phenomena of the living world. Certain fungi produce a soft greenish light through chemical reactions involving luciferin-like compounds. The function is still debated, but one hypothesis is that the glow attracts insects that help disperse spores. In tropical forests, glowing fungi can make decaying wood look faintly enchanted, though the chemistry is entirely natural. Fireflies add another form of forest light, using flashes to communicate and find mates. A forest after dark is not merely black. It can contain small, deliberate lights made by living organisms for reasons of reproduction, dispersal, and signal. Forest amphibians are especially sensitive indicators of environmental change. Salamanders, frogs, and Sicilian often depend on moist skin for respiration and water balance, making them vulnerable to drying, pollution, temperature changes, and disease. In some temperate forests, the biomass of salamanders can exceed that of birds and small mammals combined, though they are rarely seen. By feeding on small invertebrates and being eaten by larger predators, they are important links in food webs. Their sensitivity makes them early warning signals. When amphibians vanish from a forest, something in the moisture, chemistry, temperature, disease environment, or habitat structure has often changed. The fungal disease chytridiomycosis has devastated amphibian populations around the world, including many forest species. Caused by chytrid fungi that infect amphibian skin, the disease disrupts the skin's ability to regulate water and electrolytes, often leading to death. Mountain cloud forests in Central and South America, once rich with frogs, have seen dramatic declines. The disappearance of frogs changes insect populations, predator diets, and the soundscape itself. A forest that once pulsed with night calls can become quiet. This is one of the painful lessons of modern ecology. Biodiversity loss is not only visual. Sometimes it is heard first as silence. Forest predators shape the behavior of prey even when they do not kill them. The presence of wolves, big cats, owls, snakes, and other predators can change where herbivores feed, how long they remain in open areas, and which seedlings survive. This is sometimes called the landscape of fear. When predators are removed, herbivores may browse more heavily in sensitive areas, suppressing regeneration of trees and understory plants. The reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone is often discussed in this context, though the exact ecological effects are complex and debated. The broader principle is well supported. Predators influence ecosystems not only through consumption, but through the behavior they induce in other animals. Fear itself can be an ecological force. Beavers are not forest animals in the narrowest sense, but they are among the most important engineers of forested watersheds. By cutting trees and building dams, beavers slow water, create ponds, raise water tables, expand wetlands, trap sediment, and create habitat for fish, amphibians, waterfowl, insects, and plants. Their dams can make landscapes more resilient to drought and sometimes slow the spread of low-intensity fire by keeping riparian zones wet. A beaver pond is not simply a pond. It is a reorganization of water, wood, soil, and light. Forests along streams have evolved with such disturbances, and in many places, the return of beavers is now recognized as a form of ecological restoration. Forests also exist as memory in human culture. Fairy tales begin at forest edges because forests represented the unknown beyond the village. Danger, transformation, exile, enchantment, and return. Sacred groves existed in many cultures as places where trees were protected by religious meaning. In literature, forests are often where ordinary rules loosen and hidden truths appear. This cultural pattern may reflect practical history. Forests were places of food, fuel, danger, refuge, and mystery. They were necessary and uncontrollable. The scientific forest and the mythic forest are not the same, but they overlap in one important way. Both recognize that a forest is more than a collection of objects. It is a place where the human mind senses depth. The psychological effects of forests are not reducible to one variable. It is not only the color green, or cleaner air, or exercise, or reduced noise, or pleasant association, or phytoncides, or visual complexity. It is likely all of these, interacting with a nervous system that evolved in outdoor environments rich in living patterns. Forests offer complexity without the kind of social demand that human environments impose. They are full of information, but little of it asks to be answered. Leaves move, birds call, insects pass, water runs, light shifts, and the mind can attend without performing. This may be part of why forests feel restorative. They give attention somewhere to go without requiring the self to defend, explain, or present itself. Attention restoration theory proposes that directed attention, the effortful focus used for screens, work, driving, studying, and social regulation, becomes fatigued with use. Natural environments restore this capacity by engaging involuntary attention gently. A forest path, a bird call, moving leaves, or water over stones captures attention without demanding intense effort. This soft fascination allows the executive systems of the brain to recover. The result can be improved concentration, reduced irritability, and a calmer mood after time in nature. This is one of the reasons a walk in a forest can feel different from simply resting indoors. The mind is not empty. It is engaged in a way that does not exhaust it. The forest smell that people find calming is a whole atmosphere of biological chemistry. Trees release volatile organic compounds for many reasons: defense against insects, protection from heat stress, communication with other organisms, and ordinary metabolic processes. Conifers release terpenes such as alpha-pinene and limonene. Broadleaf trees release isoprene and many other compounds. Soil releases geosmin after rain. Fungi and leaf litter add their own molecules. The human nose receives all of this as the smell of forest, but chemically it is a layered mixture of plant defense, microbial activity, moisture, decay, and renewal. The comfort of that smell may be partly cultural, partly biological, and partly the nervous system recognizing a low-threat environment rich in life. Forests breathe differently across the day. In daylight, photosynthesis draws carbon dioxide from the air and releases oxygen. At night, photosynthesis stops, But respiration continues. Trees, roots, fungi, microbes, and animals consume oxygen and release carbon dioxide. Soil respiration can be a major component of the forest carbon cycle, especially in warm, moist conditions where microbial activity is high. A forest is therefore never chemically still. Its atmosphere shifts between day and night, season and season, drought and rain. The air within a forest is not simply the same atmosphere passing through trees. It is modified by the living system it moves through. The boundary between forest and atmosphere is especially active at the canopy surface. Leaves exchange gases, water vapor, heat, pollen, spores, aerosols, and volatile compounds with the air. The roughness of the canopy slows wind and creates turbulence, mixing air vertically. This affects local temperature, humidity, cloud formation, and even the movement of airborne organisms. Bacteria, fungal spores, pollen grains, and fragments of plant material rise from forests into the atmosphere, traveling with weather systems. Some biological particles may even help ice form inside clouds, influencing precipitation. The forest is not only under the sky, it participates in making the lower atmosphere what it is. Pollen is one of the ways forests move through the air. Each spring, many trees release enormous quantities of pollen, sometimes coating surfaces in yellow dust. For wind-pollinated trees, this apparent excess is necessary because the odds of any single pollen grain reaching a compatible flower are small. Pollen grains are also valuable records of past forests. Preserved in lake sediments, peat bogs, and soils, pollen can be identified under a microscope and used to reconstruct ancient vegetation. A sediment core from a lake may show the rise of spruce after glacial retreat, the arrival of oak during a warmer period, the expansion of agriculture as forest pollen declines and cereal pollen appears. Tiny grains of pollen become historical documents. Forests migrate, but they do it slowly and generation by generation. As climate changes, the suitable range for a tree species may shift northward, upward in elevation, or toward wetter areas. Individual adult trees cannot move, but seeds can establish beyond the current range if dispersal, soil, competition, and disturbance allow. The problem today is speed. Climate zones are shifting faster than many tree species can naturally track, especially when landscapes are fragmented by cities, roads, and farmland. Assisted migration, the deliberate movement of tree populations to areas expected to become suitable in the future, is debated among forest managers and conservationists. It may help some species survive, but it also carries ecological risks. The future forest may need help moving, but moving a forest is never simple. Tree diseases have reshaped entire forest regions. Chestnut blight, introduced to North America in the early 20th century, killed billions of American chestnut trees and transformed eastern forests where chestnut had once been a dominant canopy species. Dutch elm disease devastated elms across Europe and North America. Emerald ash borer, an invasive beetle from Asia, has killed tens of millions of ash trees in North America. These losses are not only losses of trees. They are losses of food sources, canopy structure, cultural memory, wood properties, insect relationships, and genetic lineages. A forest can remain green after a dominant species disappears, but it is not the same forest. Invasive species often succeed because they arrive without the predators, parasites, diseases, or competitors that limited them in their native range. In forests, invasive plants can form dense understories that suppress native seedlings. Invasive insects can attack trees with no evolved defenses. Invasive pathogens can move through populations with devastating speed. Global trade has greatly increased the movement of organisms across natural barriers, turning ports, plant nurseries, wooden packing material, and ornamental horticulture into pathways for ecological disruption. Forests evolved through migration and exchange over deep time, but the speed and volume of modern species movement is unlike anything in most forest histories. The genetic diversity within a tree species is one of its defenses against future uncertainty. Different populations may be adapted to local conditions, drought, cold, soil chemistry, pests, timing of spring, length of growing season. When a species is reduced to a small number of individuals or a narrow genetic base, it may lose the variation needed to respond to changing conditions. Conservation, therefore, increasingly focuses not only on species names, but on genetic lineages and local adaptations. A forest of one species planted from a narrow genetic stock may look healthy at first, but it may be vulnerable to a single disease or climate stress. Diversity is not only visible in the number of species, it also lives inside genomes. Forests can recover from severe disturbance, but recovery is not the same as reversal. A logged forest may regrow trees, but the soil structure, dead wood, old growth-dependent species, fungal networks, and genetic composition may take centuries to return, if they return at all. A burned forest may regenerate, but if the climate has changed, the new community may be shrubland or grassland rather than forest. A restored forest can be valuable and alive, but it may not be a copy of what was lost. Ecological time matters. Some forest qualities are grown not in years, but in centuries. This is why protecting existing old forests is different from planting new trees. Both can matter, but they are not interchangeable. There is a particular kind of time that belongs to forests. Human time is measured in hours, deadlines, years, and lifetimes. Forest time includes leaf flush in spring, mast years, insect cycles, fire intervals, decay stages, soil formation, succession, migration after ice ages, and the rise and fall of whole forest biomes over geological epochs. A seedling may wait for decades. A log may take a century to disappear. A soil horizon may take thousands of years to form. A lineage of trees may persist through ice ages by retreating into refugia and expanding again when climate warms. To think about forests is to practice thinking beyond the scale of ordinary urgency. Even the death of a tree is not a single event. A tree may begin dying at the crown, losing branches one by one. Fungi may enter through wounds. Beetles may tunnel beneath bark. Woodpeckers may open cavities. The heartwood may hollow while the outer living tissues keep functioning. Eventually, the tree may stand dead as a snag for years, providing nesting sites and insect habitat. Then it falls, becomes a log, absorbs water, grows moss, feeds fungi, shelters salamanders, and gradually becomes soil. The tree's death may support more species than its living trunk did. In a forest, death is rarely disappearance. It is redistribution. The cavities inside old trees are among the most valuable habitats in many forests. Woodpeckers excavate holes for nesting, and after they leave, those cavities may be used by owls, bats, squirrels, bees, ducks, and many other species. Some cavities form when branches break and decay opens the wood. Others form in hollow trunks. Managed forests that remove old, damaged, or dead trees often remove this entire habitat layer. A smooth, young plantation may look tidy, but it lacks the hollows, rot pockets, broken limbs, and decay structures that many species require. Ecological value is often found in what human aesthetics once labeled defect. Nurse logs show how decay becomes architecture. In wet forests, seedlings often establish on fallen logs rather than directly on the forest floor. The log lifts them above saturated soil, provides a moist substrate, and reduces competition from ground vegetation. As the log decays, the roots of the young tree grow around and through it, eventually reaching the soil below. Centuries later, the original log may be gone, leaving mature trees standing on stilt-like roots that trace the shape of a vanished trunk. The forest floor is full of such invisible histories, forms created by things no longer present. Some forests are shaped by floods. Floodplain forests along rivers experience periodic inundation that deposits nutrient-rich sediment, removes seedlings from some areas, creates new sandbars for colonization, and connects aquatic and terrestrial food webs. Trees in these forests often tolerate waterlogged soil, shifting sediment, and mechanical damage from floating debris. The river is not outside the forest. It is part of the disturbance regime that maintains it. When rivers are dammed, channelized, or disconnected from floodplains, the forest changes. Seeds that require bare wet sediment may fail to establish. Nutrient deposition changes. Fish, birds, amphibians, and insects lose seasonal habitat. The flood that appears destructive can be the event that renews the forest. Mountain forests change with elevation in compressed ecological bands. At lower elevations, broadleaf forests may dominate. Higher up, cooler temperatures favor conifers. Higher still, trees become shorter, twisted by wind and snow, and eventually give way to alpine tundra at the treeline. The treeline is not simply a line drawn by cold air. It reflects growing season length, wind exposure, snowpack, soil development, seedling survival, and the ability of woody tissue to function at low temperatures. As climates warm, treelines in many mountain regions are moving upward, but not uniformly. Seeds must arrive, soils must support growth, herbivores must allow seedlings to survive, and extreme events can still kill young trees. Even climate-driven movement happens through local details. The boreal treeline across the Arctic is one of the planet's great ecological boundaries. South of it, trees form forests. North of it, tundra dominates. This boundary matters for climate because trees darken the land's surface, absorb more sunlight than snow-covered tundra, and influence snow accumulation, permafrost, and carbon cycling. As shrubs and trees expand northward in some regions, they may amplify warming by reducing surface reflectivity, even as they store carbon in wood. The Arctic forest edge is therefore not just a botanical boundary. It is part of a climate feedback system where vegetation, snow, soil, sunlight, and temperature interact. The hidden carbon in forest soils can be greater than the carbon in trunks and leaves. In cold boreal and peatland systems especially, slow decomposition allows organic matter to accumulate over long periods. This soil carbon is vulnerable when warming, drainage, fire, or disturbance increases decomposition. Microbes that were once limited by cold or waterlogged conditions become more active, releasing carbon dioxide and methane. This is one reason scientists pay close attention to northern forests and peatlands. The visible tree line matters, but so does the dark carbon below it, stored in partially decomposed roots, mosses, leaves, and ancient organic matter. Forests and snow interact in complicated ways. Tree canopies intercept snowfall, some of which sublimates directly back into the atmosphere without reaching the ground. Snow beneath trees may be thinner, but also more sheltered from wind and sun. In open areas, snow can be deeper and more reflective. These differences affect soil temperature, water availability, spring melt timing, and animal movement. In boreal forests, snow insulates roots and soil organisms from extreme cold. A winter forest may look dormant, but beneath the snow, small mammals move through subnivean tunnels, fungi continue slow activity, and roots remain protected in the dark. The forest in spring is a race for light. In temperate deciduous forests, many understory wildflowers bloom before the canopy closes. Species such as trillium, bloodroot, bluebells, and wood anemones take advantage of the brief window when sunlight reaches the forest floor after winter, but before the trees fully leaf out. They photosynthesize, flower, set seed, and store energy quickly, then fade as shade deepens. This spring ephemeral strategy is beautifully timed and vulnerable to changes in climate. If trees leaf out earlier with warming, but the flowers do not shift at the same pace, the light window can shrink. A few days of phenological mismatch can matter to a plant whose entire year depends on spring light. Autumn leaf fall feeds the next year. Fallen leaves are not waste. They are nutrient packets, habitat, insulation, and future soil. As leaves decompose, they release nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, and trace minerals. Invertebrates shred them. Fungi soften them. Bacteria transform them. Earthworms pull them downward. In forests where leaf litter is removed or soil is repeatedly disturbed, nutrient cycling changes. The blanket of leaves also protects overwintering insects, amphibians, seeds, and fungi. A tidy forest floor is often a poorer forest floor. The mess is the system. The relationship between forests and water quality is one of their most practical benefits to human societies. Forest soils filter water as it moves downward, trapping sediments, absorbing nutrients, and supporting microbial processes that break down pollutants. Forested watersheds often provide cleaner and more stable water supplies than deforested watersheds. This is why some major cities have invested in protecting forests in their drinking water catchments rather than relying entirely on expensive filtration infrastructure. The forest acts as living infrastructure, not in the mechanical sense of pipes and pumps, but as a self-maintaining system of roots, soil, microbes, and vegetation that slows, filters, and regulates water. The phrase biodiversity hotspot often applies to forests where high species richness overlaps with high threat. Tropical Andes cloud forests, Madagascar's forests, Atlantic forest remnants in Brazil, Southeast Asian rainforests, and many island forests contain species found nowhere else. Island forests are particularly vulnerable because their species often evolved without certain predators, competitors, or diseases. When invasive rats, cats, goats, pigs, or pathogens arrive, the ecological balance can change quickly. Many island birds lost the ability or need to avoid mammalian predators because none existed. Forests on islands therefore show both the creativity and fragility of evolution in isolation. Madagascar's forests illustrate the uniqueness that isolation can produce. Separated from Africa for tens of millions of years, Madagascar evolved lemurs, baobabs, chameleons, and plant lineages found nowhere else. Its dry forests, rainforests, spiny forests, and montane forests each contain distinctive communities. Lemurs serve as seed dispersers for many trees, and some plants may now be missing the extinct giant lemurs that once dispersed their large seeds. The island's deforestation threatens not simply forest area, but entire evolutionary experiments. A forest in Madagascar is not replaceable by a forest elsewhere because its history is singular. The Congo Basin rainforest, the second largest tropical rainforest system after the Amazon, is one of the planet's great carbon and biodiversity strongholds. It stores vast carbon reserves, supports forest elephants, gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos, okapi, countless birds and insects, and sustains millions of people. Its peatlands, mapped in recent years, contain enormous carbon stocks beneath swamp forests. Compared with the Amazon and Southeast Asian rainforests, some parts of the Congo Basin have remained relatively intact, though pressures from logging, mining, agriculture, roads, and climate change are increasing. The Congo forest is not only an African ecosystem. It is a global climate system, a biodiversity archive, and a human homeland. Southeast Asian rainforests are famous for dipterocarp trees, towering species that dominate many lowland forests in Borneo, Sumatra, and the Malay Peninsula. Dipterocarps often participate in spectacular massed flowering events, where many species flower and fruit at the same time after irregular climatic cues. These mass events flood the forest with seeds and fruit, feeding animals and overwhelming seed predators. The forests also support orangutans, gibbons, hornbills, clouded leopards, sun bears, and an enormous diversity of insects and plants. Lowland dipterocarp forests are among the most biodiverse forests on Earth and among the most threatened by logging and conversion to plantations. Their loss is the loss of a vertical, seasonal, and evolutionary complexity that took millions of years to assemble. The Atlantic forest of Brazil once stretched along much of the country's eastern coast, but today only fragments remain. Despite this loss, it remains extraordinarily biodiverse, with many endemic birds, primates, amphibians, and plants. Its fragments are often surrounded by cities, farms, and roads, making connectivity a major conservation challenge. Yet, even fragments can matter if protected, restored, and connected. The Atlantic forest is a reminder that conservation is not only about untouched wilderness. Sometimes it is about damaged landscapes where enough life remains to justify hope, effort, and careful restoration. Forest restoration can take many forms. Natural regeneration allows forests to return when grazing, burning, or cultivation pressure is removed and seed sources remain nearby. Assisted natural regeneration may involve protecting seedlings, controlling invasive grasses, or reducing fire. Active planting may be needed where soils are degraded, seed sources are absent, or specific species must be restored. The best approach depends on the site. Planting trees in rows may look like restoration, but if the species are wrong or the soil conditions are ignored, the result may fail. Restoration is not simply putting trees into the ground. It is restarting relationships between roots and fungi, flowers and pollinators, leaves and decomposers, canopy and climate. There is also such a thing as a forest that is too quiet because it has lost its large animals. In some tropical forests, hunting has removed monkeys, tapirs, hornbills, elephants, and other large seed dispersers while leaving the trees standing. This is sometimes called an empty forest. From a satellite, the canopy may appear intact. On the ground, the ecological processes have changed. Large seeded trees may fail to regenerate because the animals that move their seeds are gone. Predators may decline because prey is missing. The forest remains green, but its future composition is altered. The visible canopy can hide an ecological silence. The relationship between forests and human sleep is not as strange as it may first sound. Forest environments tend to reduce arousal, lower noise intensity compared with cities, more predictable sound patterns, cleaner air in many contexts, cooler microclimates, and visual patterns that support attentional restoration. For people listening at night, the idea of a forest can itself function as a calming mental environment. The mind imagines shade, leaf movement, soft ground, and distance from social demand. This does not mean a forest is magically sedative. It means that the sensory and symbolic qualities of forests align with the nervous system's movement toward rest. Many people describe forests as peaceful, but forests are not peaceful in the sense of lacking conflict. They contain competition for light, water, nutrients, space, pollinators, and dispersers. They contain predation, parasitism, disease, decay, and death. The peace is partly in the scale and rhythm. The conflicts are not usually directed at us. They unfold through growth rates, chemistry, shade, roots, spores, teeth, and time. To a human observer, this can feel calming because it places ordinary human worries inside a wider living system where struggle is real but impersonal, continuous, and somehow balanced by renewal. A forest teaches interdependence without needing to make a lesson of it. The tree depends on fungi. The fungus depends on carbon from the tree. The bird depends on insects. The insects depend on leaves. The leaves depend on soil nutrients released by decomposers. The soil depends on roots, litter, and microbial life. The stream depends on shade. The seedlings depend on gaps. The predator depends on prey. Nothing is isolated, and yet nothing is entirely dissolved into the whole. Each organism has its own life, and each life is also part of a network. This is one reason forests are such powerful scientific subjects. They make systems visible. The oldest forests on Earth are not necessarily those with the oldest individual trees. A forest can be ancient as a continuous ecosystem even if its individual trees are younger. Fires, storms, disease, and ordinary mortality may replace trees many times while the forest community, soil, species interactions, and ecological continuity persist. This distinction matters because a landscape can hold ancient ecological memory even without a single tree older than a few centuries. Old growth is structural, biological, and historical, not merely a count of years since germination. The forest is older than the trees currently standing in it. Some tree species have seeds that can remain dormant in soil for years or decades, waiting for the right conditions. Fire, light exposure, cold stratification, scarification by animal digestion, or specific moisture cues may break dormancy. The seed bank beneath a forest is a hidden future, a library of possible vegetation waiting below the visible present. After disturbance, seeds that have waited in darkness can suddenly germinate, revealing species that seemed absent. The forest floor therefore contains not only what is alive now, but what could become alive under different conditions. The shape of a leaf can reveal the climate in which it evolved. Tropical rainforest leaves often have drip tips, pointed ends that allow water to run off quickly, reducing fungal growth and physical burden in wet conditions. Desert and dry forest leaves are often small, thick, waxy, or seasonally absent. Cold climate conifer needles reduce water loss and resist freezing. Large, thin leaves capture light efficiently in shaded, moist environments but lose water quickly in dry air. Paleobotanists use fossil leaves to infer ancient climates because leaf size, margin shape, and other traits correlate with temperature and moisture. A leaf is not random decoration. It is climate, physics, and ancestry made visible. Bark is one of the most varied and functional parts of a tree. Smooth bark can discourage vines and epiphytes or reduce places for insects to hide. Thick bark can protect against fire. Flaking bark can shed parasites and lichens. Resinous bark can trap insects and seal wounds. White bark, as in birch, may reflect sunlight and reduce winter temperature stress. The patterns people admire, plates, furrows, scales, curls, strips, are practical surfaces shaped by defense, growth, environment, and species history. Bark is the tree's boundary with the world, but it is not a wall. It is alive in its inner layers and constantly responding to injury and pressure. Tree wounds do not heal the way animal wounds heal. A tree cannot replace damaged tissue with new identical tissue in the same way skin closes over a cut. Instead, trees compartmentalize damage. They seal off injured or infected areas chemically and structurally, growing new wood around the damaged zone. This process, sometimes described by the Model CODIT, compartmentalization of decay in trees, allows a tree to survive while parts of its internal wood are dead, hollow, or colonized by fungi. A hollow old tree may still be healthy if its living tissues remain functional around the outside. The tree does not erase its injuries. It grows around them. The forest's relationship with time is written not only in rings, but in layers of decay. Freshly fallen leaves, partly decomposed litter, humus, mineral soil, roots, fungal hyphae, buried charcoal, old pollen, insect fragments, and mineral grains all occupy different positions in the soil profile. A handful of forest soil can contain recent carbon from last autumn's leaves and older carbon stabilized for decades or centuries. Charcoal from a fire long forgotten may remain in the soil, altering chemistry and water retention. The ground is therefore not a passive surface, but a layered memory of growth, disturbance, and decomposition. Some forests are shaped by animals so large they function as ecological forces. Forest elephants in Central Africa disperse large seeds, open trails, break vegetation, and may help maintain the structure of certain forest types. By feeding on smaller trees and undergrowth, they can influence which tree species dominate and may even increase the proportion of large, carbon-dense trees. Their decline can therefore alter carbon storage and forest composition. In the Amazon, tapirs and large monkeys perform seed dispersal roles for many plants. When large animals disappear, the forest's regeneration changes. Megafauna are not ornaments in forests. They are part of forest architecture. The extinction of ancient megafauna likely changed forests around the world. During the Pleistocene, large herbivores, browsers, and seed dispersers moved through landscapes in numbers and diversity far greater than today. Mammoths, giant ground sloths, gomphotheres, giant deer, and other animals shaped vegetation through browsing, trampling, nutrient movement, and seed dispersal. Some living trees may still bear traits once linked to extinct animals. Large fruits with seeds too big for most current dispersers, defensive structures against browsers that no longer exist, growth forms shaped by vanished pressures. Modern forests may therefore be missing interactions that shaped their evolution. They are not only living systems, but survivors of ecological worlds partly gone. The fossil record of forests shows that forests have repeatedly collapsed, migrated, and reassembled under changing climates. During ice ages, many temperate tree species retreated into refugia, warmer or more sheltered regions where they survived while ice sheets covered northern landscapes. As the ice retreated, forests expanded again, but not as complete communities moving together. Each species moved at its own pace, following its own dispersal ability and climatic tolerance. The forests that returned after the last ice age were new combinations, assembled from species with different histories. This is important for understanding the future. Forests are not fixed units. They are dynamic assemblages, and climate change can rearrange them. The relationship between forests and mountains creates isolated evolutionary laboratories. Mountain ranges compress climate zones into short distances, and valleys can isolate populations. Cloud forests on separate peaks may function like islands in the sky, each harboring unique species. As temperatures warm, species adapted to cool mountaintops may shift upward until there is nowhere higher to go. This is one reason montane forests are conservation priorities. They often contain high endemism, complex microclimates, and species with narrow ranges. A single ridge can hold a lineage found nowhere else on Earth. Forest canopies can create their own weather at small scales. Under a dense canopy, temperatures are often cooler by day and warmer by night than in open areas. Humidity is higher. Wind is reduced. Rain reaches the ground more slowly, dripping from leaves after the storm has passed. Fog may condense on foliage. These microclimates matter enormously to organisms living near the ground: seedlings, fungi, insects, amphibians, and soil microbes. When the canopy is opened by logging or severe disturbance, the forest floor becomes hotter, drier, and more variable. For small organisms, that change can be as significant as moving to a different climate. The word forest includes plantations, young regrowth, ancient old growth, mangroves, cloud forests, boreal taiga, dry thorn forests, and urban woodlands, but these are not ecologically equivalent. A plantation of evenly spaced trees of one species may store carbon and produce timber, but it cannot provide all the habitat, genetic diversity, dead wood, soil structure, canopy layering, and ecological relationships of a mature natural forest. This does not make plantations worthless. They can reduce pressure on natural forests if managed carefully. But language matters. Calling every tree-covered area a forest can hide the difference between a living ecosystem and a simplified production system. The future of forests will be shaped by climate, fire, disease, land use, politics, economics, and human imagination. Some forests will be lost. Some will shift. Some will be restored. Some will surprise us by adapting in ways models did not predict. Forest science is therefore not only descriptive but practical. It asks how to protect old systems, how to restore damaged ones, how to manage fire, how to respect indigenous knowledge, how to maintain biodiversity, how to store carbon without simplifying life, and how to live with trees in a warming world. The questions are scientific, but they are also moral, because forests are not abstract. They are places where countless forms of life are already living. For the person listening at night, the forest can be held in the mind as a slow system. Roots below, leaves above, rain moving through, fungi connecting, birds sleeping with heads tucked under wings, insects hidden beneath bark, moss holding moisture, a fox passing along the edge of a clearing, a seed in the soil waiting for a gap in the canopy, a fallen log softening year by year. The forest does not hurry, but it is never inactive. Its calm is not emptiness. Its calm is the steadiness of many processes continuing at once, each at its own pace. The science of forests, taken together, reveals a system of staggering complexity operating at every scale from the molecular to the continental, from the millisecond chemistry of photosynthesis to the million-year timescales of soil development. It reveals a system that has been shaping the chemistry of the atmosphere, the hydrology of continents, and the evolution of life since the Devonian, and that continues to perform these functions at a scale and with a reliability that no human engineering has yet approached. And it also reveals something quieter. A forest does not need to be mysterious in order to be profound. It can be understood in terms of xylem, fungi, carbon, nitrogen, rainfall, succession, seed dispersal, soundscapes, fire regimes, and soil horizons, and still remain astonishing. Explanation does not empty the forest of wonder. It gives the wonder roots. Somewhere tonight, leaves are moving in darkness. Somewhere, roots are taking up water. Somewhere, a fungus is dissolving the wall of a fallen branch. Somewhere, an owl is listening through trees, a seed is waiting under soil, and a river is running colder because a forest shades it. The forest is awake in its own way, even when it seems still. And for tonight, that is enough. A final detail worth holding is that every forest is both local and planetary. The roots of a single tree enter a particular soil, in a particular climate, with a particular history of fire, rain, animals, and human presence. But the leaves of that same tree exchange gases with the atmosphere shared by the whole planet. Its water came from clouds shaped by oceans and winds. Its carbon came from the air. Its seeds may feed birds that migrate across continents. Its wood may store sunlight captured decades before. To understand a forest is therefore to move constantly between scales. The moss on one stone, the beetle under one piece of bark, the mycorrhizal thread around one root tip, and then the movement of water and carbon across the earth. This is one reason forests remain scientifically inexhaustible. Every answer opens a smaller question and a larger one. How does this leaf sense shade? How does this fungus choose where to grow? How does this bird decide when to migrate? How does this forest change the rain that falls hundreds of kilometers away? How does the carbon stored in this soil influence the climate of future centuries? The forest offers no single final explanation because it is not one process. It is thousands of processes nested together, each understandable, none sufficient by itself. There is also the simple fact that forests change the way distance feels. In a city, distance is often measured by streets, signs, appointments, and destinations. In a forest, distance becomes slower and more textured. A bend in the path, a fallen trunk, a patch of ferns, the sound of water before the stream is visible, the way light changes after passing beneath a denser stand of trees. This altered sense of distance is not only poetic. It reflects the way the brain processes environments rich in repeated but non-identical patterns. Forests provide enough variation to remain interesting and enough repetition to remain calming. They are complex without being chaotic, ordered without being mechanical. That balance may be one of the reasons forests have remained such powerful places in human memory. A forest can be studied as carbon, habitat, watershed, biome, or evolutionary archive, and all of those descriptions are true. But it can also be experienced directly as shade, scent, sound, and softened attention. The science does not replace that experience. It explains why the experience has depth. Sleep well. Good night.